Hello and welcome to Red Red. Today I have a video that I believe I'm going to entitle Where to Start with Vladimir Nabokov. So usually on my channel I will talk about specific books, however what gave me the idea for this video is actually realizing that with the exception of his letters, the author William Gaddis, I've read all of his work, and that was the only author where I've read all of their works, and so I was going to make a video, where to start with William Gaddis, and that is still going to come. That's on the horizon. However, it got me thinking. I was like, I know that I haven't read any other author's complete works. I still have to read Finnegan's Wake, and then Joyce will be done. But I thought, okay, well, who are some of the authors where I've read, whose works I've read the most of? And I had a feeling it would be Nabokov, and I double checked and I was right. I've read 9 books by Nabokov, and so what I thought is, even though I haven't read all of his books, and I have still some books on my bookshelf to read from him, and some to buy in general, I thought that it could be cool to talk about his works just in the order that I read them, tell you what the experience was of reading them, and then hopefully give some suggestions of a recommended reading order. For example, even though Lolita's the first one that I read, I might not recommend starting with Lolita, but depends, I'll leave it up to you. I'll just talk about my experience of reading these Nabokov books. So yeah, this is Where to Start with Vladimir Nabokov. So where I started with Nabokov was in 2021. I read Lolita. Obviously I'd heard about it. This was the only book that I'd associated with Nabokov's name, and I didn't even really realize he had other books. I read Lolita, and the interesting thing, so what happened with Lolita is that this was the book that made me realize that writing could be good. And I know that that's going to sound insane, but bear in mind that I really wasn't a reader. I was reading kind of genre fiction and things like that. Up until then, I think, my most read books were just kind of in the fantasy genre. However, I knew about Lolita, I knew I wanted to read it, I knew it was a classic book, and my brother had told me that it was, his thing was have a French dictionary on hand, because you're going to need it. But what happened with reading Lolita was, it was the first time, Lolita unlocked things for me, and whenever I talk about it, I say that Lolita was the book that made me realize that books can be good, and it's because the writing is brilliant, and it made me realize what prose is, and it's because the plot is not special, or the characters and the setting and whatnot, but just the way that something's written. And this is so obvious now, right? Coming from someone who makes videos, and I pretty much only read literature and classic literature and stuff, it's sort of duh to hear me saying this, but Lolita was the first book that made me realize what a book can be. And so in that sense, I do have a soft spot for it, and so I do recommend it. However, I know that there's of course the subject matter can make it hard to read, but the conflict that I have with Lolita is that not only is it not my favorite Nabokov book, but it is not even, I think, Nabokov's best book, although that's up for debate. I can see why people would kind of say that, no, Lolita is the most popular for a reason. It's really well written, and so on and so forth. Of course, if you, how could you not know, but if you don't know, Lolita is a story of a main character named Humbert. Humbert, who is a pedophile, falls in love with a young girl who he dubs Lolita, and there's a lot of sort of slapstick humor. The book is not as graphic as people imagine. What's kind of sickening about it is, and a million people have said this, which is why I've not made a video about Lolita. What's sickening is how charismatic the main character is, but the really hard stuff to read in the book is just sort of from the halfway point onwards to the end, where you're sort of seeing the slow deterioration of each of the two characters. This book sold many millions of copies. It's worth reading. It's shorter than you think. It's not actually this long, just because this edition has some pretty big font. You will be able to read it pretty quickly. if you're going to read only one Nabokov, like, you may as well at least read the Nabokov that everyone else has read so that you can talk to them about it. But yeah, there's a lot more coming, so Lolita is probably not the place I would recommend starting if you know you're going to read a couple of his books. Next up, this is my favorite. This is my absolute favorite Nabokov book, Pale Fire. I have talked about this book so many times I've not made a video for it, but I've talked about this book, ad nauseum in every other circumstance that I can possibly manage. And I'm a sucker for like postmodern or metafictional stuff. So just to give an idea, Pale Fire is a story about two people. One is a poet whose name is John Shade, and the other is Shade's editor, whose name is Charles Kimbo. And the composition of the book is this. We start with an introduction, and the introduction in classic Nabokov style is not written by a real person. In this, it is written by Charles Kimbo himself. Then we have a 1,000 line or 1,000 minus 1 line poem. After that poem, which was written by John Shade, the character, of course, like everything is written by Nabokov, we then get into the commentary. And so the commentary is written by Charles Kimbo. And the brilliant thing is that Charles Kimbo revered John Shade, and Kimbo was also a teacher where John Shade taught. Kimbo would go out on walks and talk to John Shade, and he would hear John Shade talking about the poem that he was writing, Pale Fire, and he would tell stories about his Zemblan homeland, and he would just say like, oh, you should worm this in. When Kimbo gets his hands on the poem, he's so sure that John Shade wrote about he sees the poem, he sees that it's John Shade just writing about his life, writing about his family, and there's no mention whatsoever of Zembla. However, absolutely adamant that it must not have been omitted, the commentary of this book is Kimbo taking lines from the poem and saying, oh, this line must obviously be in reference to this thing that's about me, and he goes on these whole long page diatribes that have absolutely nothing to do with the poem Pale Fire. Brilliant. I just I was so glad that this was the second Nabokov book that I read, because I was like, okay, I've read Lolita, is that it? Is that going to be sort of the best it could be? And then I read another book that is like not only, I think, kind of more interesting or more well written than Lolita, but just personally like so attuned to my tastes. So if you're going to start, either this book or the next book that I'm going to talk about are the starting points, in my opinion, for Nabokov if you don't want to read Lolita as the first place. If you happen to read Pale Fire, you'll know that you're reading essentially Mr. Reed Red's favorite book, or his favorite Nabokov book at least. But yeah, I won't say anything more about that, but that's Pale Fire. That's the second Nabokov book that I read. Pretty quickly after, I read Pnin. And Panin is cool because he is a university teacher. His name's Timofey Pnin, and he is previously of Tsarist Russia, and he now lives teaching kind of Russian at an American campus. The interesting thing with the composition of Panin is that firstly, he makes a cameo in Lolita. Actually, you can see him, but Panin was written at the same time as Lolita, and Nabokov would allegedly sort of use Panin as a oh god, I've got to get out of Humbert's skin, I need to just write something. And so Panin is like a bumbling avuncular goofball, and he's just he's very pitiable, and the story can be kind of malicious in the same way that you can kind of interpret Don Quixote as being very malicious, with the way that people are kind of indulging in the foolishness of the main character, and that's how Nabokov felt about Don Quixote as well. But Panin is more lighthearted, but it's inexplicably or inexplicitly sad and kind of like cruel book, and it's just it's just interesting. It's a way of Nabokov sort of processing being, a Russian emigre, and kind of wrote about it in a book that is very funny on the surface to read, but as it dawns over time, you just think like, wow, these people who are around Timofey are really mean to him, and you're just also getting kind of ideas from Nabokov himself. So I would generally, of course it depends on, like, I can't prescribe one book to start and just say like, oh, you have to read this as a start, because if I was talking to you in person, I would find out where your interests lie and what else your, how your tastes are. But as a general starting place with Nabokov, I would say Panin's a pretty good start. It's quite short, and you'll be able to just kind of go through it and get a taste of Nabokov's great prose style without necessarily needing to dive into something as kind of verbose or heavy as like Lolita or Pale Fire. Next up, the Luzhin Defense. This was cool because this is the first book I read of Nabokov's that was originally written in Russian, and this was not translated by Nabokov. Some of his Russian books, and even some of the ones that are coming up later, were translated by like Nabokov and by Nabokov's son. However, this one is translated by Michael Scamell, but it is translated in collaboration with the author. So the premise of this one is that this is about a prodigious international grandmaster chess player who more or less goes crazy. And it's a cool idea. Nabokov was a chess player himself. He composed chess puzzles, but the kind of and there was apparently also a movie made about this, which I haven't seen, but I think it did well. This is I liked reading this as a sort of introduction into Nabokov's prose style, and just seeing what it would be like, the differences of him writing in English versus Russian. I remember feeling like there was a very big difference between the way that this book was written and the way that his English novels are written, and still good, but I knew that I was kind of more inclined to, or was gravitating more towards his English novels. The Luzhin Defense, though, is interesting, and I recommend reading it at the very least, just because he talks about kind of paranoia, schizophrenia, talking, and like the obsession of being kind of so committed about for an art, like a mental art like chess. Next up, Vladimir Nabokov's Speak Memory. I love this so much. This is his autobiography, but Nabokov being Nabokov, he's very obviously written it in such a hypnotic trance style that you can't help but feel like surely there are things that are like fictionalized, and it's still got his same like charming prose style, and he's kind of like, it's like Proust condensed, like just trying to like talk about his childhood. It's interesting to see the things that he focuses on, because Nabokov spends, like pages and pages talking about his maid, but he like rarely talks about his siblings. So or like his governess, I suppose, who would have been educating him. So yeah, this is also easily like the best autobiography or memoir or biography that I've ever read, even though I've not read that many of them, so it's not like I have this whole reference or like this whole kind of lineage of biographies to reference against. But if you like Nabokov, or if you're the sort of person who's inclined to reading biographies just to get interested in a person, even before you've read any of their stuff, this will be amazing. And I really liked as well, the last section is sort of written, it's set in Berlin, and it just talks about like almost like a day or a week of being in his life with his wife and his son, Dmitry. Really beautiful. My one of my favorite works by Nabokov, and it's his just his autobiography, which is still written in such a beautiful prose style that it's going to be a worthwhile reading experience. Next up, Ardor. In my opinion, Nabokov's best book. Basically, this is a love story. This is a romance, and it is a romance between Ardor and her meeting her cousin Van Veen, and but in classic Nabokov twisted style, Ardor's parents Ardor's mum and dad and Van's mum and dad are each twins. And so biologically, they're brother and sister. And so, yeah, Nabokov, just being classic, twisted, warped mind that he is, decides to write this romance novel. There is some cool metafictional stuff going on, and I actually made a video talking a lot about this book because I really loved it. And so I won't go too deep into it because obviously I already have that video. But there's like, it's just, you know, the first part almost reads sort of like his autobiography read, with just setting up like this kind of Russian aristocracy home environment, and how much he talks with affection, like the characters will talk with affection about their parents. Just reminded me a lot of Nabokov talking about his mum and dad. We have a big essay in the middle, or in like part 4 of the book, where that's like Nabokov's perspective on time and how time works, and it's sort of reinterpreted into Van's like Van's own work and career. There's a lot of weird sci-fi world building stuff going on way in the background. Like, it's not actually set on Earth, it's set on a place called Anti-Terra, where because of like colonization, everybody speaks, like everyone in America speaks Russian and French, which is such a genius way of just kind of like symbolically portraying what it's like being an immigrant. And yeah, just brilliant. I think it's Nabokov's best book, in my opinion. And if you just want to be like, don't necessarily want to read Lolita, you want to read Nabokov's best book, go for Ardor. It's going to be amazing. Okay, next up, a kind of wind down. Like, the books are all good, but next up I read Despair. And so Despair is cool because it is by it is a character named Herman, who is a chocolate, he like owns a chocolate factory, and he meets a character, like a homeless man named Felix, who Herman is convinced that Felix is his doppelganger, and it starts to really like play on him, and it becomes this like twisted kind of almost like a murder mystery of sorts. But the reason I liked this is because Nabokov actually talked about how Herman was like a character that he felt was more warped and messed up than Humbert, which, you know, obviously we're getting kind of like preludes and stuff with the name like Herman. But yeah, like, I recommend reading it. It's you know, this could be one that you just read at any time. It could be the first one and it'll be good. It could also, like me, it could be the 6th Nabokov book that you read, and it'll still be a worthwhile experience. Cool thing with this one is that this work was translated by Nabokov. So he talks about it in his introduction, about having to make the sort of changes that are required, like how to reinterpret it, because when you're coming back to a work after decades of having written it, you have a temptation to want to rewrite it, and he sort of works through that. Yeah, a kind of paranoid schizophrenia murder mystery novel where the main character is owns a chocolate factory. Alrighty, next up, I read Nabokov's collected poems. I knew that Nabokov was a poet, and that he still wrote a lot of poetry in Russian even after he kind of started writing books proper in English. I don't have much to say on this, just that I liked it. There are a couple of, I'll just read a poem, like a general poem. This is called To the Grapefruit. Resplendent fruit, so weighty and so glossy, exactly like a full-blown moon you shine, hermetic vessel of unsweet ambrosia and aromatic coolness of white wine. The lemon is the pride of Syracuse, mignon yields to the orange's delights, but you alone are fit to quench the muse when thirsty she has come down from her heights. And I'll read another one. This is In Paradise. My soul beyond distant death, your image I see like this, a provincial naturalist, an eccentric lost in paradise. There in a glade a wild angel slumbers, a semi-Pavonian creature. Poke at it curiously with your green umbrella, speculating how, first of all, you will write a paper on it, then... But there are no learned journals, nor any readers in paradise. And there you stand, not yet believing your wordless woe, about that blue somnolent animal. Whom will you tell? Whom? Where is the world and labelled roses, the museum and the stuffed birds? And you look and look through your tears at those unnameable wings. So yeah, if any of that sounds cool, give Nabokov's poems a try. Some of them are written in English, but I believe a vast majority of these were originally written in Russian and then translated by so some of them are translated by Nabokov, some of them are translated by his son Dmitry. And lucky last, this is the last Nabokov book that I read, my boy Cincinnatus, Invitation to a Beheading. Interesting thing with this book is that Nabokov was essentially accused of plagiarizing Kafka. Kafka's The Trial. The idea is this man, Cincinnatus, rocks up, gets accused of a crime, and he's held in jail. And then there's a really, it's just oddness occurs in this jail. There's some unreliable narrator stuff, but the interesting thing is that for an author, and again, I believe I made a video on Invitation to a Beheading, so I won't go too deep into it, but for an author who's so, in his English works, so resistant to symbolism and things being allegorical, it felt like there was a lot of hermetic kind of occult stuff going on in the background of this book. But I think that this will also be a perfectly fine place to start reading Nabokov. And also, I'll see if I can find it. There's a really cool YouTube animation of that someone made in homage to this story. But yeah, those are all of the Nabokov books that I have read. I hope you enjoyed hearing my thoughts, talking about them. I tried to be a little bit more vague for the ones where I've already made videos on them, because you can just go and find dedicated videos where I'm talking about them and reading extracts from them. But yeah, if you haven't read any Nabokov, obviously I recommend reading them. It has been a while. It's been about a year since I've read any of Nabokov's works, but out of those, also on my bookshelf, I have The Gift, and I have his collected short stories. So let me know if there's any of those that you recommend I read soon, and if there are any other Nabokov books that I haven't mentioned at all that you recommend I read, for those of you who've obviously already read Nabokov. If you haven't, my TLDR recommendation is, if you're only going to read one, read Lolita. If you want to read his best, read Ardor. If you want to read my favorite one, read Pale Fire. If you want an easy way to get in to Nabokov, either read Despair, Panin, or Invitation to a Beheading. At some point, do yourself a favor and get around to reading Speak Memory, his autobiography. Thank you for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and please comment below what Nabokov books you've read. Let me know if there are some, if you have any more questions about it, and I'll be happy to chat about Nabokov. Stay tuned. At some point I'm going to do a video about Gaddis as well. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.